The snow didn't melt all at once. Ugh. It gave up slowly, like it was tired of holding on to everything beneath it. I stood behind the farmhouse with my boots sinking into the soft earth, watching the last white patches shrink into thin veins along the fence line. The wind brushed my face. Not cold anymore, just damp, carrying the smell of frozen soil waking up. Somewhere, a crow cried, sharp and alone. That was when I noticed the uneven patch, not snow, something underneath it. A ripple in the ground that didn't belong to winter or spring. Just a quiet place where the earth sat wrong. I hadn't planned to dig that day. Count. I was only clearing the drainage path so the runoff wouldn't creep toward the foundation again. A small, ordinary chore. The kind you do when you want to keep your hands busy instead of your mind. The shovel leaned against the fence, metal dull and spotted with old rust. Ellen's shovel, my sister's, though I'd never labeled it that until now. Everything here was hers once, the house, the cracked porch boards, the crooked wind chime hanging by a single nail. Even the silence felt inherited. I took the shovel and walked toward the uneven spot, each step slow, heavier than it should have been. The ground there was softer than the rest, a thin crust of snow clinging on top, beneath it dark and uncovered soil. I told myself it was nothing. Spring often revealed small surprises, stones, broken branches, bits of old fence buried by snowdrifts. This land had always kept things tucked away like that, but something about this felt different. I pressed the shovel into the soil. The blade slid too easily. I dug once, then again. The earth turned over like damp chocolate cake, and already I could feel my pulse starting to rise, the smallest warning in my chest. And after 15 years, my body still reacted before my mind ever did. I thought of Lily's face. I hadn't meant to, but I always did when the ground shifted beneath me. Another scoop. A dull sound followed, not the scrape of stone, but the hollow tap of metal meeting something thin. I froze. Fucker. The shovel stayed lodged in the soil while the sound echoed inside my ears. Tap. Fragile. Not natural. I dropped to my knees, brushing away the loosened dirt with my gloves, fingers stiff from habit even though the air had warmed. The soil clung to everything. Under my nails, across the cuffs of my jacket, there it was. A small rust-stained corner peeking from the ground. I brushed faster now, uncovering a tin box no bigger than a shoebox, edges eaten by time. The lid was welded shut by rust, its hinges barely visible. It sat slightly tilted like it had been laid down gently instead of dropped. Someone had placed it here. Not lost it, my throat tightened. I carried the box inside without thinking, mud flaking onto the kitchen floor as I went. The house was quiet, always quiet, except for the ticking of the stove clock, Sister-ra.m. Time still insisted on moving forward, even here. I set the box on the table, testing the weight with my palms. It felt too light to hold anything important, but heavy enough to hold a story. I didn't fetch tools. Yow! I prized open the lid slowly, twisting it with careful pressure until the rust finally cracked with a soft, brittle sigh. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed, sealed, clean, untouched by dirt, like the tin had done its job too well. On the front, in slow, rounded handwriting, was a name I had not seen written since the year Lily disappeared. Lily Collins, my sister's handwriting, Ellen's careful loops, the slightly slanted way she always crossed her Ellens. I sat down hard in the wooden chair. For a long time, I only looked. Kang. The envelope sat there like it had just arrived, like it was waiting to be opened at any moment, not because 15 years had passed first. Not because the girl it was meant for had never come back. I lifted the envelope between two fingers, as if it might dissolve. The paper felt thin, older than I expected, but not fragile. Ellen had used the good stationery, the kind she saved for birthdays and Christmas cards. I turned it over. No stamp, no address, just Lily's name. That's when the weight settled, not the box, not the letter. The realization, this letter had never meant to go anywhere. It wasn't forgotten. It had been hidden. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The kitchen smelled like wet earth now. I had tracked the world inside with me. Soil from the thawed field, rust dust from the tin, time carried on my palms. Why bury it? Why write something to your daughter and choose the ground instead of her hands? Memories dripped in slowly. The weeks before Lily disappeared, Ellen always seemed to carry words she never let out. The way she hovered near the windows, the way she folded laundry too precisely, as if control mattered too much. I used to think grief arrived when Lily left, but Ellen had already been grieving something then. The envelope trembled in my grip. I had the sudden urge to put it back, seal the moment away, rebury the quiet truth waiting inside. But I didn't, because silence is its own kind of lie. I tore along the edge carefully, each inch of paper tearing louder than it should have in the still kitchen. The first lines appeared, my sister's handwriting flowing toward me like a voice finally allowed to breathe. My sweet Lily, I hope one day you read this somewhere safe. Hayne, I stopped, didn't read further, not yet. The letter wasn't ready to speak, and neither was I. Outside, the wind brushed the dead grass against the farmhouse siding, a soft, hollow sound, like something trying to get our attention. I slid the letter partway out and stared at the pages folded inside, unopened roads waiting to be walked. The tin box sat beside it, empty now, its job finished. I carried everything to the front window and let the pale spring light fall over Ellen's handwriting. For the first time, the name Lily didn't feel impossibly far away. Just paused, waiting. The uneven patch outside looked small now, barely a scar on the greening field, but I knew better. The ground had kept a secret long enough, and I was standing with the first piece of it in my hands. I folded the letter back inside the envelope. Not yet. Some truths travel slower than the thaw. Hey, I whispered the name aloud. Barely more than breath, Lily. The house did not answer. But the silence felt different now, as if it had begun to listen. The letter never left my hand. Not through the walk from the yard, not when I shut the back door with my shoulder, not even when I brushed dirt from the table with the sleeve of my coat. It rested there, small, sealed, and quiet, like something that didn't want to be touched yet. Morning light slid through the frosted window and caught the dust in the kitchen air, turning each floating speck into falling snow. The stove clock ticked too loud. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, the pipe sighed. I placed the letter at the center of the table and stepped away, as if distance might make hearing it easier. Didn't sit right away. I walked to the sink instead, rinsed dirt from my fingers, though none of it showed any more. The water ran longer than needed. I watched it disappear into the drain, proof that some things could be carried away so simply. The house felt awake in that private way old buildings do, every timed creak and hum part of a steady routine. The chipped cabinet doors, the faded curtains stitched by Ellen long before Lily was born. Everything here seemed to lean toward memory, like objects breathing quietly around the past. I glanced back at the letter. Unopened, still heavier than anything else on the table. 15 years ago, this kitchen had looked different, brighter. The fridge covered in Lily's crooked drawings. Sky always purple, suns always too big. Ellen used to hum while cooking dinner, the same 3 notes looping until Lily joined in off-key. After that night, the drawings disappeared. So did the humming. That night never faded the way memories usually do. It stayed sharp, like glass lodged somewhere behind my eyes, the calls that went unanswered. My voice echoing down voicemail lines that never connected. The frantic search through ditches and doorways, asking strangers their names just to hear another human voice speak back. And the funeral, a church full of flowers with nowhere to look but the space where a casket should have been. And people said her name like it was glass too. Gentle, careful, Lily. I swallowed and finally moved to the chair. Sat. The letter lay in front of me like a resting heart. The fear I felt wasn't of what might be written inside. It was the fear that something I'd waited 15 years to understand might finally loosen. And that once truth comes loose, you can't coax it back into silence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, letting the letter sit between my hands, not touching it, just close enough to feel the weight of it, as unreal as that sounds. The paper carried a mild scent, dust and metal from the box, maybe the trapped breath of the earth it slept beneath. I pictured Ellen writing it, her brow pinched in concentration, pen moving slow and steady the way it always did. She hated crossing anything out. If the words weren't perfect, she started over, new page, clean lines. I wondered how many pages she had thrown away before this one found itself buried instead. My finger moved on its own, tracing the inked curves of Lily's name, L-I-L-Y. The way Ellen crossed the second L was unmistakable, a tiny diagonal flick that turned the letter almost playful. Lily loved that. She practiced copying it when she learned cursive. covering pages of her notebooks with her name until everything else disappeared beneath repetition. I closed my eyes, could almost hear her voice, not loud, not demanding, just soft asking to be noticed. I sat there too long. The clock ticked past the hour and kept going. The clock ticked past the hour and kept going. The kettle began to warm on the stove, forgotten. Okay. Heat crept upward, reddish glow touching the metal's side, but I didn't move. I stared at the envelope as if it might open itself. As if truth might leak out in tiny pieces first. Something manageable, something gentle, silence settled around me. The kind that presses outward instead of inward, the kind that waits. I lifted the letter, just held it midair. Lycus. That's when the weight changed. Not physically, but emotionally. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a boundary. On one side, 15 years of not knowing. On the other, the possibility of understanding something I had spent half my life avoiding. I held it close to my chest, breathing shallow. I thought of Ellen's eyes the last time I saw her, the night before Lily disappeared. She didn't look at me when she hugged me goodnight. She stared toward the hallway instead. I thought then she was tired. Now I wasn't so sure, my sweet Lily. Best. Those words echoed from memory even before I read them again. I must have glanced at the first line without realizing it. The way you sometimes read something important without meaning to. I unfolded the corner slightly. Enough to confirm the ink was still there. Yes, Ellen's voice preserved on paper, but I stopped myself. Because I realized something in that moment. If I open it, there's no going back to not knowing. Not knowing had become familiar. Painful, yes, but predictable. It gave shape to my days. Hope where answers would have gone, questions where facts might have settled, but reading that letter would rearrange everything. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was afraid of losing the version of Lily I'd carried this whole time, preserved in the stillness of absence. The Lily who never aged, never changed, never learned what happened to her mother. Still whole, still safe. My hands shook slightly, enough that I noticed it. I placed the envelope back on the table and slid it to the far end where sunlight reached. Not hiding it, just giving it space, giving myself space. The kettle began to whistle. I let it scream a while before standing, before crossing the kitchen, before turning off the heat that had waited patiently to be acknowledged. Steam clouded the window as I poured the water. The dust still floated, catching the light. Outside, the snow had retreated farther into the shade, thinning into pale outlines along the field's edge. I sat again, cup in hands, facing the unopened letter. My reflection hovered faintly in the window behind it, the envelope centered between my eyes. We looked like strangers sharing the same space. I traced Lily's name one last time with my fingertip. Not pushing. Pulling. Not pulling, just a touching. I whispered without sound. Not now, but soon. The letter stayed where it was, patient, waiting like it had all those years underground. And, for the first time in 15 years, waiting felt possible. The clock ticked onward, the house held its breath. Truth! And beside me on the table, a truth rested, quiet, sealed, ready to finally be heard. The envelope made a sound when I broke the seal. Not loud, not sharp, just a small sigh, like something finally giving in. Tick-a-my, montagne. I paused with the paper half opened. Action have traveled, Mentar. Listening to the quiet of the kitchen fill the space where that sound shouldn't have traveled. Outside, the wind brushed the window pane like a hesitant visitor. The clock ticked on, unaware that time had decided to fold backward. I unfolded the letter slowly, afraid the words inside might still be warm with her breath. The page felt thinner than I expected, soft at the edges, angled carefully even before I had touched it. Ellen's handwriting met me immediately. Steady loops and evenly spaced lines. She never rushed her words. Even when she spoke, she paused between thoughts like each sentence deserved its own breath. Yet, I traced the margin where her pen must have hovered before starting. It was as if the paper still carried the memory of hesitation. Morning light leaned across the table, pale and gentle, settling over the ink like a veil. Dust floated lazily around the room. Tapping against the air so quietly, I wondered if I was hearing things that weren't there. I remembered Ellen sitting in the same kitchen, handwriting cards while Lily colored beside her. The little scrape of pen tips. The way Ellen always straightened the paper with 2 fingers before writing the first word. Always careful. Always precise. I swallowed before reading aloud, not to hear it spoken, but to steady the act of understanding something that might change everything. The kettle had gone cold behind me. I didn't notice when, somehow, the house felt even more still than before. Like it was leaning in. My sweet Lily. Yo. That was how it began. Rushed, not dramatic. Just gentle. The way my sister always spoke when asking Lily to come wash her hands or put on her coat. I hope you find us one day somewhere safe. My breath caught on the word safe. The next lines unfolded slowly, full of apology. Quiet, careful words that sounded exactly like Ellen's voice during moments she didn't know how to explain herself. She wrote about keeping distance when mother instinct said to pull closer. Nay, about quiet choices that must have felt impossible at the time. And then came the promise, Kano, a promise I made to protect you, even if it meant letting the world misunderstand us both. I read the words twice, protect. From what? Ellen continued, her script tightening slightly, the loops less round. She wrote about watching kindness too closely, about someone in town who seemed helpful to everyone, about how generosity can sometimes be a costume, a smile that never reaches the eyes, she wrote. Yeah, those words sent a familiar chill down my spine. In small towns, kindness isn't questioned, it's trusted. Yeah, it's assumed safe. Ellen wrote that she began noticing patterns, coincidental encounters, lingering attention too heavy to ignore, a presence in places where none was needed, and Lily had noticed too. Ellen confessed that Lily once came to her late at night, whispering fears she couldn't put into proper adult words, only that someone felt too close, and too watchful, too interested, that Ellen told her it was nothing, then stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the wall. The letter ached with this contradiction, reassurance spoken outwardly, terror growing inward. She wrote, I am afraid to speak this aloud because words give things power. And beneath it, I am afraid silence gives them more. My hands trembled, barely enough to blur the ink. Ellen said she buried the letter not because she didn't care, but because releasing it before Lily was safe felt like betrayal. If you ever return and this has been found, please forgive me. The handwriting shifted again. Tighter, now, smaller. Rushed in places, the calm rhythm of earlier sentences fractured. Every night, I wonder if I chose wrong. Every morning, I wonder if silence keeps you safer than truth. She began apologizing not for being quiet, but for being afraid. The words sounded less like a mother and more like a woman trapped between duty and dread. I pressed the paper down with my palm. Ellen had been carrying this alone all that time. Yet she wrote about conversations she never finished, warnings she never sent. Moments when the urge to tell the authorities or confront the person consumed her, only to retreat again, for fear of putting Lily closer to danger rather than farther from it. She feared being believed too late, or worse, being disbelieved entirely. She wrote, if something happens to me, know that everything I did was to keep you alive, relive. The word landed like weight. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until I forced air back into my chest. Then, the bottom of the page ended unexpectedly, mid-sentence, no signature, no closing thought. Just blank paper where Ellen's voice should have continued, as if the pen had been pulled from her hand. I flicked the page. Nothing. The letter had ended without saying goodbye. Without explaining the final fear that had driven her to burial. I stared at the empty paper, longer than I stared at her wungwa, longer than I stared right at her words. It felt louder. What silenced her? What moment came that was powerful enough to stop even Ellen from finishing her sentence? My thoughts traveled backward to the way she'd looked that last night, avoiding my gaze, standing too stiff in the doorway, not tired, scared, and alone. I folded the letter back along its original creases, careful not to disturb the fragile ends of Ellen's sentences. The kitchen light had shifted, noon had edged closer. The dust no longer sparkled, it drifted dull and quiet in the air. I pressed the envelope flat with my thumb and traced Lily's name again. King, my sister's hand had written fear onto that paper. Her heart had bled into the pauses between lines. But someone, or something, had kept her from finishing. I looked toward the window where the field stretched pale and wide beyond the glass. Somewhere out there was the rest of her story. I whispered into the silent room, "What stopped you, Ellen?" The house did not answer. The letter lay folded beside my cup, incomplete and waiting, as if the final words were still traveling toward me from somewhere beyond the snow, beyond the years, and just not ready to arrive yet. The photograph fell from the shelf when I brushed past it. The frame hit the floor softly, glass unbroken, just turned face down like it didn't want to be seen. I stood there a moment before picking it up. It was Thomas Gray standing beside the farmhouse fence, shovel in one hand, his other arm lifted in a half-wave that looked almost rehearsed. Snow covered the ground around his boots. He'd been smiling, not with his eyes. I set the picture back in its place and felt something tighten in my chest, the kind of feeling that comes when memory decides to rearrange itself. The light outside had dimmed since morning, the way winter afternoons do even when spring is supposed to be arriving. Clouds hung low over the fields, flattening the horizon into a pale blur. I sat at the kitchen table with Ellen's letter folded beside me and the photograph propped upright, studying a version of the past I once thought I understood. Thomas Gray had been the town's quiet helper, tall, gentle, never louder than necessary. The sort of man who fixed loose steps without asking for payment, delivered groceries to elderly neighbors before they had to call, and kept spare gloves in his truck when storms grew cruel. When Lily vanished, he was everywhere, not in an invasive way, in the way that made people grateful. Soup on the porch, a mended back door, fresh salt laid on walkways before dawn. He spoke in careful tones, looked people directly in the face, both hands visible at all times. Back then, we thought it was kindness. Now, sitting alone with the hum of the refrigerator and Ellen's unspoken fear beside me, I wasn't sure what it had been. Ellen always stiffened when Thomas arrived. Not dramatic, nothing anyone else would have noticed. Just an extra pause before opening the door, the smallest sigh escaping her breath. She doesn't like strangers, I once explained to him. He'd nodded politely. I understand, he said. He said that about everything. I walked to the back window and stared out at the yard where Thomas often stood during those weeks. He'd lean against the fence as if waiting for something that never came, his gaze drifting toward the woods beyond the creek. I remember thinking he seemed tired or lonely. When parents from town gathered at the farmhouse, he hovered at the edges of the group, offering coffee refills or adjusting the porch light without being asked. Sometimes I found him talking quietly to Ellen in corners of rooms. I never listened closely. It felt polite not to. But whenever I entered, their conversations would cut short. Ellen would turn stiffly toward me. Thomas would smile, that soft, contained expression that didn't quite reach the eyes. "How are you holding up?" He'd ask me each time, the same words, same careful voice. During searches, Thomas joined the volunteers, walking lines through snowy fields, calling Lily's name on cue. He kept exactly the right pace with everyone else, never faster, never slower. At night, he left lanterns glowing in trees to guide teams back to the road, thoughtful, responsible. We told each other, this is the kind of man you trust. But sitting here with Ellen's words, I began replaying moments I'd dismissed. How often Thomas was nearby when Ellen grew tense, how he always seemed to know when to arrive. How he'd once asked, "Has Lily called yet?" before we said anything to the volunteers, before word had spread. We'd chalked it up to helpfulness, but helpfulness knows distances. Kindness respects space. What if his closeness had meant something else? I pulled open the junk drawer beneath the sink, Ellen's old catch-all, and found folded thank you cards meant for Thomas. She'd written them but never mailed them. Each card stopped mid-message. Thank you for. Each sentence ended incomplete. Like the letter buried in the tin, I recognized the pattern. Ellen began writing when she thought gratitude was the right response, then stopped when something else rose up instead. Fear, perhaps, or doubt. I remembered the day Thomas patched the broken back door. It was late afternoon. Light slanted low across the floor. Lily was upstairs. I stood behind him as he worked, metal tools clicking. He turned suddenly and asked, "Does she ever walk the creek alone?" I hadn't understood the question. Aww. Sometimes, I'd said, distracted. He nodded slowly, like someone checking a mental note. Later, Ellen said nothing, but her hand had hovered at her mouth for the rest of the evening. I thought she had a headache, now I wondered if she was holding back words. A chill crept over me that had nothing to do with weather, because the puzzle pieces weren't forming an accusation. Just a shape that looked like familiarity stretched too thin, like kindness worn as an access pass. Had Thomas been watching? Not helping? Watching. Not helping, watching, manduring, waiting. The idea didn't arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, like dawn light seeping under the edge of a curtain. The photograph still leaned against the wall. Oh, yeah, Thomas by the fence, snow at his boots, that rehearsed half-wave frozen mid-gesture. Yeah. I slid the image into the drawer with the unsent thank you notes and shut it softly. Outside, the wind threaded through the bare trees and carried sound across the open field, a low, unsettled rustling. I folded Ellen's letter again and pressed it to my chest. "What did you see that I didn't?" I whispered. No answer came, just the hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, and the memory of a man standing too close to where Lily last walked. Somewhere between comfort and caution, the truth began to move, slowly, quietly, toward the light. The sewing desk hadn't been touched in years. Dust sat thick on its surface, undisturbed enough that my finger left a clear trail when I brushed it away. The small stool beneath it rested crooked, one leg shorter than the others, just as Ellen had kept it. When I pulled the chair out, the floor creaked like it remembered. I hadn't planned to look through the desk. Well, some spaces feel private even after the people who kept them are gone. But something beneath the wood caught the corner of the light, a thin brass keyhole, hidden, waiting. The room smelled faintly of old fabric and lavender soap, Ellen's scent, preserved in cotton scraps folded neatly on the shelves. A half-finished quilt still lay across the desk, one sleeve stitched, the other abandoned mid-pattern like a sentence left unfinished. I sat on the stool and traced the thimble beside the pincushion, the small dents where Ellen pressed metal into cloth over and over again. Routine had been her shield, sew, clean, cook. As long as order lived in her hands, she kept the chaos locked away inside. I ran my palm across the desk's carved edge, worn smooth from years of use, and leaned closer toward the underside. Sure enough, tucked beneath the tabletop sat a shallow drawer impossible to spot unless you knew to look for it. It had a tiny metal latch, locked. I stared at it longer than I should have. Ellen disliked secrets. Or at least she pretended to, but I remembered her tucking bills into antique teacups instead of filing them, hiding spare cash beneath folded linens. Quiet habits of someone preparing for an emergency she never named out loud. I rose and searched the kitchen until I found a small box of loose keys near the doorway. Half of them no longer belonged to any locks still in the house. Trial and error felt wrong. I wanted the right one, the one Ellen meant to open this space with. The third key slid into the latch effortlessly. The metal turned. Click. The drawer opened only a few inches before resistance caught. Inside, I saw stacked notebooks, thin composition books bound in faded blue and green covers. I eased them forward and lifted one out. The first page held nothing but a series of dates, no explanations. Just careful handwriting. February sen, lo, sisher p.m, February, chi, wu, shirar a.m, February, shirar, Late evening. Turning pages. More appeared. Times without context. Locations described only with fragments. Back fence. Creek bend by the porch. Then lines written smaller. Coat watching eyes again. I stopped reading for a moment and pressed a thumb into the paper, steadying myself. The floor was cold beneath my feet. The room suddenly too quiet. I flipped further. The entries grew longer. Then stranger, truck idled too long near the mailbox, steps stopped when I turned the light on. And once Kino, smile that didn't belong there, Ellen never named anyone, not once. But the fear in each line was unmistakable. She had been watching someone while believing someone was watching her. Each notebook followed the same pattern, dates, locations, fragments, no conclusions, no confrontation. Just careful observation, as though the act of documenting might protect her somehow. One book ended abruptly halfway through. The last entry. I know, Lily says she feels followed again. The page beneath it was empty. Tang, torn out, removed with precise force, clean along the perforation, no ragged edge left behind. A deliberate decision, not panic. Control. I closed the notebook and stared at the drawer full of them. This wasn't a woman imagining danger. This was a woman mapping it. I placed all the notebooks on the desk and spread them like pieces of a puzzle. Months of entries formed. Months of entries formed a timeline, and near the end, the handwriting changed. The loops grew tighter, the margins narrower. And sentences rushed into one another without the air Ellen usually gave her words. Spoke to him today. He denies noticing Lily. I don't believe it, Lily cried tonight. Says he was near the creek again. My chest tightened on the word again. The final pages were the most frantic. Yeah, short. Clipped phrases scratched into paper. Watching from road. Staring too long. Lily frightened. I must choose carefully. And 3 days before Lily vanished. I think he knows, I know. That sentence nearly slipped past me. I reread it slowly. I think he knows I know. All this time, Ellen hadn't just been observing. She had been afraid of being observed in return. I sat heavily back onto the stool. The flooring creaked beneath me. She never told me, never spoke aloud what she was seeing. Why? The answer felt painfully simple, because in quiet towns, people who say they're being watched sound ridiculous. Paranoid. Or too emotional. Ellen likely believed that proof mattered, and that speaking without it could make everything worse. So she kept her observations secret, collected dates, wrote fragments, waited, and while she waited, Lily disappeared. I placed my hand on the notebooks. These were witnesses that never testified. She'd lived in terror behind small domestic gestures, folding towels, mending quilts, cooking stew, shielding Lily not with confrontation, but with silence, and that silence had grown heavier until it bent her handwriting itself. I slid the notebooks back into the drawer carefully, not hiding them, simply preserving the way Ellen had arranged them. The torn page lay missing from the pattern like a breath cut short. I locked the drawer again and rested the key atop the sewing desk. Through the window, afternoon light grazed the field, the creek a thin, pale slash beyond the trees. I imagined Ellen standing there once, pretending calm while watching a world she knew had changed. I whispered into the empty room, Who were you afraid of, Ellen?" No answer followed, only the soft rustle of unfinished quilt fabric shifting with a draft. The notebooks remained beneath the desk, the unanswered names remained unwritten. And the fear Ellen had stitched into silence now hummed quietly in the corners of the house, waiting for the one thing she never managed to give, a voice. The path was thinner than I remembered. Winter had folded it inward, grasses leaning across the dirt like crossed arms. I stood at its mouth with my hands in my coat pockets, listening to the quiet. Yoking. Not silence, but something holding its breath. The fence behind me creaked once in the wind, like the house clearing its throat. Beyond the first bend the woods waited. Bare branches stitched the pale sky together. I could still see Lily there, 5 steps ahead, sketchbook tucked under her arm, boots too big for her feet. She never turned back to see if I was following. She always assumed I was. That assumption stayed behind longer than she did. The farmhouse looked smaller from the trail. As if the land had decided to reclaim its distance. I started walking. Each step sank into soil softened by old snowmelt. My boots made a careful sound, scritch, pause, scritch, like the ground didn't trust my weight yet. Ellen hated this path, said it twisted too much, hid its end from its beginning, but Lily loved it. She called it the long inhale, because everything grew quiet before the creek came into view. I used to trail behind her, watching the way she counted birds aloud under her breath. 2 robins, 1 hawk. Her voice had always been like this trail, light moving forward even when the way curved. After she disappeared, the memory of the path became heavier. And people spoke about it like a road leading away, never back. Everyone assumed that whatever took her used this way, like it was an exit ramp from our lives. But I remembered the photographs differently, the muddy prints preserved in evidence folders and forgotten shoeboxes. All of them pointed outward, away from the farmhouse. None turned back. That detail sat in my mind like an unasked question. Why would Lily leave without turning around? The air cooled as I passed the first bend. Shade thickened where the trees crowded close. The scent of wet bark and old leaves settled around me, sharp and earthy. At a fallen log by the second turn, I stopped. She used to sit there sketching, balanced like the log was a narrow bench. I touched the wood, rough with lichen, and felt the grain beneath my glove. I imagined her hand resting there once, steadying a page as the wind tugged corners loose. Further down, the trail narrowed until it became more memory than walkway. Brush pressed narrow at my sides, whispering as I passed. Ta benk habit, I bought a cat behavin' I bent once. Yeah, I bent once her loo habit, to look for prints that no longer existed. Time doesn't preserve footprints, only stories do. But stories fade. The creek came into view through reeds that bent like tired dancers. Water ran quietly, not rushing, but moving with a patient purpose. I stood at the edge and took in the small clearing. Something caught the light near the waterline, not natural. No. Not stone, a dull glint tangled in the reeds. I moved closer, crouched. The mud sucked at the heels of my boots. My fingers closed around a loop of rusted chain. The pendant rested in my palm. A small copper disc, pitted, tarnished, stamped with a tiny bird that had once been etched in careful detail. Lily wore it everywhere. Ellen bought it at a traveling market years back, said it reminded her of freedom. Lily just liked that it spun. I turned the chain gently. It made no sound. Time had muffled it completely. This wasn't something dropped during a long escape. It lay too close. Too near the home she never meant to leave. Her path stopped here. I looked around the clearing, the bent grass, the muddied edges of the creek bank. This wasn't a place someone wandered through unnoticed. Someone stood here. Someone waited here. The trail behind me felt longer than before. Suddenly it wasn't a way out. It was a funnel, bringing her exactly where someone wanted her to be. I held the pendant to my chest. She had never gotten far at all. I sat on the damp earth and listened to the creek run its quiet course, understanding sinking like a slow bruise beneath my ribs. No one chased her, No one chased her through the woods. No one dragged her miles from home. She had walked to the edge of normal life and never crossed back. The danger wasn't distant. It had been waiting nearby, close enough she didn't run, close enough she didn't turn around. I stood, leaving the pendant resting where I found it. Some memories don't belong to pockets. Sprint the hush of reeds abane. The path behind me stretched thin and empty, no footprints, no voices. Only the hush of reeds bowing low. I took one last look at the creek, gentle, unforgiving in its quiet, and felt the ache of knowing Lily must have stood in this same place, believing she could still make it home. The farmhouse light blinked faint through the trees, so close, closer than I ever realized. I began the walk back alone, the woods closing behind me. And for the first time, I knew the truth wasn't hiding deep in the forest. It was standing right at the edge of our door, waiting for someone brave enough to look back. Yawn. The library door sighed when I opened it. Not a grand sound, just a tired breath, like the building wasn't surprised to see me. Dust moved in narrow sunbeams between tall shelves. The air smelled like paper that had been touched too many times. I paused inside, listening to the soft click of my boots against old linoleum. Every sound felt too loud in this place meant for whispers. Lily used to wait near the window, counting buses while she pretended to read. She always chose that seat. Close to the street, close to leaving. I stood there now, fingers resting on the back of the chair, wondering how moments can become heavy without ever making a noise. Mrs. Harrow sat at a small desk near the reference section, her back curved forward like a folded page. Silver hair pinned in a careful bun. She had tutored Lily twice a week after school, helped with writing, hyperfermanifying, spent time untangling math problems over mugs of lukewarm tea. She looked up slowly when I approached. Her eyes searched my face as if aligning a memory. "And you look like her sister," she said softly. Not a question. I nodded. She gestured to the chair across from her. The legs of it made a hesitant scrape when I pulled it back. Between us sat a quiet space heavy with things unsaid. She kept her hands folded, thin, veined, steady, but I noticed the tremor beneath the calm. I always thought she was brave," Mrs. Harrow said, the way she watched the world before stepping into it. I swallowed and traced the grain of the desk with my fingertip, brave. Lily had never felt brave to me, only curious. The kind of curiosity that doesn't stop to think about danger. Outside the window, a truck passed slow, tires whispering against pavement. The world kept going. The librarian studied the light until she spoke again. "There's something I should have said sooner." Her voice lowered, like the shelves themselves were listening. "That day," she began, stopping once. The afternoon she didn't come back. I leaned forward without realizing. "She left tutoring early." "Mrs. Harrow continued. Said she forgot something at home. Her fingers tightened together, but she lingered outside the store first. Talking to someone? Mrs. Harrow nodded, eyes beginning to shine. A man. She paused again, then forced the words out gently. Dark coat. Wore gloves even though it wasn't cold yet, had a way of standing too close without touching. My chest tightened. Did you recognize him? She swallowed. No name, but I'd seen him around town, doing repairs, carrying tools. King people trusted him, Thomas. She didn't need to say it. I watched them through the window, she said. Jill. She looked upset, not crying, but not safe. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked quietly. Her lips trembled. A kostbast husnaun tiet för force. At first I thought it was nothing, a disagreement, a misunderstanding. She turned her eyes downward. When Lily never came back, I thought it wouldn't help to share a moment I barely understood. Her shoulders sank inward. I told myself someone else surely saw more. The room held that sentence like a bruise. No one else had. Mrs. Harrow reached slowly into a drawer and pulled free an old attendant's notebook. She flipped to a page and pointed with one delicate finger, a scribbled note beside Lily's name. Left, upset. Spoke with handyman outside. I wrote it down, she whispered. Then I closed the book and never opened it again. Her eyes met mine, wet and unguarded. I didn't know about your sister's fears, she said. Didn't know Ellen suspected someone. Ellen had tried to sound calm when she told us things felt wrong. She kept it wrapped in polite phrasing. Just a strange feeling, nothing serious. We hadn't pressed her. We hadn't listened, Mrs. Harrow clasped the notebook to her chest like a confession. I thought being uncertain was safer than being wrong, she said. But silence didn't protect her, did it? No, I replied. Not accusing, not comforting, just truth. The realization settled between us. Lily hadn't vanished without witnesses. She had vanished in front of quiet people who looked away because looking felt too hard. Cat Thomas didn't hide her. We hid the truth from ourselves. Trust made him invisible, and fear made us blind. I thanked Mrs. Harrow and stepped back into the street. Afternoon wind moved loose flyers along the sidewalks like restless thoughts. I walked past the store window where she said Lily stood, watched my reflection pass across the glass. So many people must have walked by them that day, no one looking close enough to see concern. I stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, imagining Lily there, sketchbook pressed to her chest, searching the man beside her, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for help she never asked for. The bus pulled up and hissed to a stop. I didn't board it. I just watched it go, carrying the quiet with it. And I wondered how many witnesses were still out there, holding small, unspoken truths like folded notes in locked drawers, waiting for courage to finally open them. The road thinned to gravel before the trees opened. Dust lifted behind my car like a quiet warning I ignored. Thomas's place stood alone, a slanted workshop leaning into the edge of pine woods. The paint had peeled to a pale gray, matching the sky that forgets itself before rain. I turned the engine off and sat with the ticking heat, listened to the silence bloom. No birds, no breeze. Just the soft creak of a door somewhere inside the building. I rested my palms on the steering wheel and breathed. There are moments when you know the air is waiting. This was one of them. The workshop smelled like metal and time. Oil stains soaked the floorboards into dark memory-shaped patches. Tools rested exactly where they must have been left, lined up with care, untouched for years. Thomas stood near the workbench, wiping his hands with a cloth that was already clean. He looked smaller than I remembered. Still broad-shouldered, still steady, but something in the posture had softened. Mara, he said, my name landing too gently. He gestured toward a folding chair. I didn't sit, didn't know you had this place, I said. Didn't use it much after. He let the sentence trail away on its own. We stood between the smell of old machinery and the heavier smell of what remained unsaid. Thomas kept his eyes moving. They never quite landed on mine. How have you been? He asked. I thought of the locked drawer, the frantic handwriting, the rusted pendant caught in reeds. Statting, I answered softly. Some days. He nodded, accepting an answer that wasn't one. The silence tightened, stretching between us like wire. Something invisible vibrated beneath his polite calm. Thomas folded the cloth again. Perfectly. I found a letter, I said. He stiffened only in the smallest way. A pause, a breath held too long. From Ellen, that did it. Yeah, the cloth stilled in his hands. Oh, a word barely shaped. She was afraid, I continued. She warned of someone watching. Thomas shifted his weight. But she never named anyone, did she? He asked. Not defensive, just quick no, I said. Another silence bloomed. Did you see Lily that day? I asked at last. Wong Thomas exhaled, slow, as if releasing a practiced truth. Yes, his eyes finally met mine, direct but distant. She came to me near the store, he said, asked for help, said things weren't right at home. Ken, my throat tightened. She didn't say who's home, he added quickly. She wanted to leave town for a while. Thought I could drive her somewhere safe, did you? I asked. He shook his head. No, that would have been, inappropriate. His voice found strength in that word. I walked her to the creek instead. Kang told her she should go back and talk to her mother, get help the right way. The story landed smooth. Heck, too smooth, no stumbles, no memory pauses, just lines he had practiced until they flowed. And then, I whispered. And then we parted ways. I stepped closer. The floor creaked like it remembered. And the pendant? I asked. His eyes flickered, gone before he could hide it. The one Lily wore? I added. A silver bird charm. Yan, color drained from his face, quiet as fog. You found that? Yes, near the creek. His jaw tightened. Kang, I don't know how it got there, he said too quickly. The pauses were gone now, only answers. Perfect, airtight answers. I didn't do anything wrong, he said. I just tried to help. There it was. The same word everyone had used in the weeks after Lily vanished. Help. Ellen had tensed every time she saw him, stiff shoulders beneath practiced politeness. She never said his name. Yeah, she never had to. I remembered him bringing soup. Fixing the hinge on our back door while Ellen stood in the hallway pretending to tidy something that didn't need tidying. She didn't look at him, not once, Thomas swallowed. She asked me not to tell anyone, he continued. So I didn't, and you let the silence stand? I asked. He hesitated. People trusted me. The words felt heavier than any confession. Trust, a shield, covering gaps where truth hid quietly underneath. I studied his face, the careful expression, the calm arrangement of features. He smiled, I thought. Eno, but not with his eyes. Something unfinished lived behind that stillness. Not guilt, not innocence either, just something closed. I left without another word. The door whispered shut behind me. Outside, the sky had darkened, clouds pulling low over the pines. The creek wound invisibly beyond the trees, carrying secrets toward deeper places. I sat in my car before starting the engine, listened to the day breathe. Thomas hadn't given me answers, only shapes where answers should be, too neat, too carefully told. Ellen must have seen that shape too, the polished kindness, the empty spaces beneath. What scared her wasn't what Thomas said, it was everything he didn't. I drove away as the first rain struck the windshield, soft and sudden. Some truths come down gently. Others don't fall yet at all. They wait in the sky, heavy and unspoken. I spread Ellen's notebooks across the kitchen table. The morning sun cut through the curtains in thin stripes, painting dust motes like drifting snow. Something about the torn page nagged at me. The edges were too precise, deliberate. I flipped through old photo albums, the yellowed corners stiff under my fingers. One label caught my eye, a date scribbled in pencil, matching the missing page number. I paused. The page wasn't lost. It had just been waiting for me to notice. I traced the album slowly, letting the quiet of the house press in around me. Yet, every creak of the floorboards echoed like a reminder of what had vanished. Ellen's handwriting curled across the page I found tucked inside a photo sleeve. Familiar loops, familiar slants, words meant to shield, to warn, to be read only by me. The air smelled faintly of paper and dust, but there was also something older, sharper, fear, careful, and quiet. The diary page described a confrontation I hadn't known about. Ellen and Thomas, voices raised, not loud but urgent, clipped in the way they only were when someone dared to step too close. Lily had told Ellen she felt watched, followed. The words scribbled here matched the tension I'd sensed in photographs, in small gestures, in the way Ellen's smile never fully reached her eyes. I held the page in both hands. It trembled slightly, though it was dry and flat, a warning never given aloud. And a plea hidden in plain sight. How could I have missed it for all these years? The page unfolded like a secret that waited for sunlight. It detailed Ellen's intentions. She planned to go to the authorities, to speak what she knew. But she hesitated. How could she prove anything without destroying lives? Even the word trust seemed to tremble on the paper. I read the lines over and over. Her careful handwriting twisting into desperate loops toward the bottom. If anything happens, tell Mara. My fingers hovered over the words. The letter wasn't just a record. It was a hand reaching across time, asking me to hold what she could not say aloud. The confrontation she described was tense. Thomas had been calm, polite, smooth, the same way I remembered from my own meeting. Ellen's voice, though not spoken, vibrated through the page, tense, small, and unwavering. She had seen danger before I ever did. I wondered why she never said his name, why she carried fear like a shadow beneath routine. The page became heavier in my hands. Not with ink, but with the weight of everything left unsaid. I stared out the window. The trees were bare, skeletal against a gray sky. Her message was clear. Her fear had been real. I flipped the page again. Small details struck me. Notes about times, locations, the way Ellen observed without revealing herself. The diary wasn't just Ellen's memory. It was a map of quiet vigilance. I realized she had been living in two worlds, one in daylight, where polite smiles masked anxiety, and Cato, one in shadows, where she recorded every small tremor of unease. The missing page explained the pendant, the creek, the path Lily had taken. It explained why Ellen hid letters, why she buried them, why she whispered only in ink. Every fragment lined up, the tense evenings, the hurried glances, the meals interrupted by quiet panic. I felt my own heart tighten, pulling together threads I hadn't seen before. And yet, even as the diary answered questions, it created new ones. Why hadn't Ellen been able to tell me in person? Why did she bear that silence alone? I traced the last line with my finger again. If anything happens, tell Mara. I understood then that the page wasn't just a record of the past. It was a compass, a key, a plea to act when she could not. The missing fragment in her notebook, once a source of frustration, now became a bridge between fear and understanding. Her silence had been deliberate, and I was finally the one to listen. I returned the page to its place in the album, between photographs of Lily smiling in sunlight and snow-dusted paths. The house seemed to exhale around me, settling after the tension of discovery. I stood and walked to the window, watching the world blur under the soft morning light. Dust motes drifted like old secrets in the sun. The diary page rested in my hands, not just words on paper, but Ellen's voice finally reaching me. A silent message survived, waiting for its moment to be understood. I whispered her name softly, almost a prayer. Thank you, Ellen. Some truths don't arrive when we expect them. They wait, and when they do, they demand we hold them carefully, like fragile snow in our palms. The tin box waited where I had left it, half buried in the corner of the kitchen counter. Light from the low winter sun glanced off its rusted edges, highlighting tiny flecks of ash along the seam. I picked it up slowly, noticing the faint smell of smoke, old paper, and something almost metallic. The letter was incomplete. Pages that should have been there were torn, burned at the edges. Ellen had left me only fragments. I pressed my palm to the box. A quiet tremor ran through me. The truth was partial and yet heavy. I sat at the table, the kitchen silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my weight. Each fragment of the letter seemed to hum with Ellen's presence, her careful, protective voice spilling across the yellowed paper. The missing pages had been torn before burial. The corners were charred, blackened. Ash lingered in the tin box like a warning, or a memory that refused to be forgotten. I traced the edges of the fragments with my finger. Ellen had deliberately destroyed what she feared could provoke retaliation. Perhaps details of Thomas, perhaps the threat she sensed but could not name, all carefully erased. The room smelled faintly of smoke, of old paper, and winter chill that seeped through the window frames. It was a scent that carried her intent, safety, protection, and secrecy. I realized slowly that the burial of the letter wasn't secrecy for secrecy's sake. It was a delay, a holding pattern. Ellen had wanted her words to reach me only after danger had passed. And yet, the ash told another story. Had the danger truly passed at all? I unfolded the fragments, laying them carefully side by side. The The sentences I could read described threats unsaid, warnings whispered only to the paper, to me. The letter had started gently, a quiet explanation, apologies, reassurance, protective instructions for Lily, then urgency crept in. Ellen wrote of fear, of someone close who might take advantage, someone whose kindness masked darker intentions. The missing portions loomed between the lines, an absence that shouted louder than any words. I tried to imagine what she might have written, the names she feared to say aloud, as she dared not mention. Every fragment hinted at truths I wasn't yet ready to see. I held the remaining pages to the light. The ash caught in the sun like tiny sparks frozen mid-flight. Ellen had wanted me to find these words safely, shielded from harm until I could bear them. It was a calculated protection, deliberate and haunting. The partial truth made sense but left a hollow ache. The burial of the letter was not a secrecy, it was a pause, a safeguard. I felt her presence in the quiet kitchen, in the weight of paper in my hands. Ew! In the silence between the words. The fragments offered clarity and confusion at once. Ellen's voice pressed forward, urging caution while revealing what she could. I read again the lines where she described the day Lily disappeared. The fear, the urgency, the protective instinct, every letter a heartbeat. Then the abrupt halt at the torn edge, the blackened corner, a sudden silence. I understood now. Ellen had destroyed the pages because she could not risk more lives, and she could not risk me. I jizzed with trembling fingers. The ash told me she had known, or at least feared, that revealing everything too soon might provoke retaliation. Every choice, every burn mark, every hidden fold was deliberate. The letter was unfinished, yet complete in its intent. It wasn't meant to tell me everything. It was meant to guide, to warn, to survive beyond the danger she carried alone. I held it close, feeling the weight of her careful decisions. Her silence was not indifference, not neglect. It was strategy, love, fear, and hope bundled in fragile paper. And yet, as I stared at the charred edges, the question lingered: had the danger truly passed? Or was it merely waiting in shadows, unseen? I replaced the fragments in the tin box, closing it gently. The faint scent of ash lingered, a reminder of words once too dangerous to speak. Outside, the snow began falling again, soft and quiet. It covered the world in pale light, washing the landscape clean, though the history of fear and protection remained beneath the surface. I touched the tin, then the letter, then the box again. Ellen had hidden, burned, buried, and waited, and now her words rested in my hands. Partial truth, deliberate silence, love and fear interwoven. The danger might still linger, but her protective intention was clear. Her voice, though fragmented, finally reached me. And for the first time in years, the weight of unspoken words began to lift. The sky was pale gray, the kind of winter morning that makes the world feel muffled and soft. I carried the tin box, the remaining letter pages, Lily's pendant, and Ellen's notebooks to the authorities, each item wrapped carefully in brown paper. The weight of them pressed into my palms, not heavy with mass, but with years of silence, fear, and unspoken truths. As I walked up the steps of the station, snowflakes drifted down lazily, landing on my coat and hair. They were quiet, unhurried, like the world itself was holding its breath. For a careful step. For the first time, I felt the burden of secrecy starting to lift just a little with each careful step. Inside the station, the air smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and disinfectant. I set the items on the counter and explained their significance. The notebooks, the fragments of Ellen's letter, the pendant that had been tangled in reeds near the creek. The officer listened patiently, taking notes, occasionally glancing at the worn edges of the paper as if they might speak aloud themselves. I watched the snow outside through the frosted window panes, imagining the creek, the path Lily had walked, the pendant half hidden in reeds. Memories pressed in, her laughter, the small sketches she left in notebooks, the quiet afternoons she spent alone with her thoughts. Even now, the mysteries lingered, unspoken and incomplete. The officers promised to reopen the investigation. New witness testimony would be added, the partial truths I now held carefully documented. I realized that I might never know Lily's full story, the ending she deserved. Some mysteries never resolve. Yet the act of speaking the fears aloud, Ellen's fears, Lily's story, offered a small measure of release. After leaving the station, I drove slowly back toward the farmhouse, the snow beginning to blanket the roads in white. Everything felt quieter, softer, the world seemed paused, holding a fragile sense of possibility. Hi. At the edge of the yard, I knelt at the memorial stone erected for Lily. Her name carved deep into the cold granite, simple, enduring. I laid the remaining letter pages beneath a cluster of fresh flowers, their petals bright against the gray snow. Yeah, each page was fragile in my hands, but heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. I thought of Ellen's careful planning, her fears, her silence that had protected more than it had hidden. The ash-stained fragments, the notes, the pendant, all pieces of a story I was only beginning to understand. Okay. I let my fingers brush lightly over the stone, the snow settling onto the flowers, over the pages, softening edges, covering time itself. It felt like a gentle acknowledgement, a quiet promise. That Lily existed, that she mattered, that the truths buried in secrecy had not been lost completely. The snow continued to fall, larger flakes now drifting onto my coat and hair. It was cold but not harsh, a winter that felt like quiet absolution rather than punishment. I imagined Ellen's hands, writing those letters, folding them carefully, hiding them, waiting for the right time. I imagined Lily's face, unspoken questions, unsent messages, footsteps that had led her away from home, but never fully into the world. The fragments and the tin box had become a bridge between silence and memory, fear and acknowledgement. Yay! I realized then that the letter's purpose had never been simply to reveal a mystery. It had been to preserve her, to ensure she was remembered, even if the ending remained unknown. Some dangers and some truths are partial, imperfect, unfinished, yet still worthy of reverence. I stayed a while at the stone, watching the snow gather in layers. Each flake seemed to carry away a piece of grief, a piece of uncertainty. The weight of secrecy had lifted slightly, replaced by acknowledgement, remembrance, and the faint, quiet hope of resolution. The wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying snow in gentle swirls across the yard. I stood, brushing the powder from my coat, and took one last look at Lily's memorial. The letter's remaining pages rested beneath the flowers, hidden beneath white yet impossible to forget. I knew some questions would remain unanswered, some stories would never close neatly. Yet the act of uncovering, submitting, and laying the fragments down had disturbed the silence, lifted a shadow, ended a shadow, and honored memory. As the snow thickened, I felt a quiet peace, fragile but real. Ellen's fears, Lily's presence, and the partial truths all existed together now. Some mysteries endure, but memory and love do too, and perhaps in that quiet snowfall that was enough.